Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our lunchtime talk today, which will be talking about the PlantRight program. We are waiting for as many folks that are registered to join us, and we hope to start around 12:05.
So 2 questions, thanks for answering. The first one is, what portion of today's invasive plants in California do you think came from horticulture? And the answer is more than half, per a study by Carl Bell of UC Cooperative Extension. And question, which is a surprising answer, but we're all working together to reduce that. Question number 2 is ways in which we all care, care about horticulture, and many of us garden at home, and many of us appreciate public landscaping. And it looks like a fair number of folks on the call are actually professionally involved with horticulture, which is great. So thanks for joining, and I'll stop sharing the poll results.
All right, well, I think we're ready to get going. My name is Julie Clark, and I'm with University of California Cooperative Extension based in Ventura. And I'd like to, before we get the program going today, I would like to acknowledge and thank our cooperators who made this week's lunchtime talks happen. First of all, California Invasive Plants Council. We have Doug Johnson and Nikki Valentine with us today, and colleagues with University of California Cooperative Extension, Dr. Beatrice Noboa Berman and Randall Oliver. So thank you. It's for helping make this week of presentations happen. And now we're going to go ahead with our program for today. I would like to introduce our speaker, AlexSimmons. She has been the PlantRight program manager since October 2019, when she oversaw the transition of the program from Sustainable Conservation to Plant California Alliance. In 2021, she successfully relaunched the PlantRight Retail Nursery Survey, and shortly after was promoted to Associate Director of Plant California Alliance. Alex currently serves on all Plant California Alliance committees, including PlantRight, CCN Pro, Research, and Scholarships. In addition to Plant California Alliance, Alex is the Executive Administrator for the International Plant Propagators Society Western Region. She holds a bachelor's degree in sustainable agriculture and food systems from UC Davis and associate's degrees in biological and natural sciences from Sierra College. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks, Julie, for the introduction, and thank you so much for having me today. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, get my presentation started. Everything look good? You can see the slides?
Yes, and Alex, I'd like to interject something before you get started. Everyone, we're employing both the question and answer buttons and the chat today. We will be posting relevant links and information that might be useful to you. And any questions or concerns you have, please put them in the Q&A, and we will answer them after Alex completes her presentation. Thank you, Alex.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here during Invasive Species Awareness Week to be presenting about PlantRight and what we do. As Julie mentioned, I am the Associate Director of an organization called Plant California Alliance, which manages the PlantRight program. And my background is both in agriculture and horticulture. When I first started my role with PlantRight, I knew about weeds that popped up on farms and in gardens, but I didn't really understand the gravity of invasive plants and what their impacts were. However, through attending amazing seminars like this one and working with awesome invasive plant managers and academics, the PlantRight Steering Committee, I've learned so much about this issue, and today I'm excited to share with you what I've learned and hopefully help develop an understanding, a deeper understanding for you all about what the invasive plant issue really is in California. So overview for today, we'll cover what is PlantRight, what are invasive plants, which is an important kind of baseline to establish because many different organizations have slightly different interpretations of the definition. So I'll give you what PlantRight's definition is, and then what is PlantRight doing about invasive plants? Why does PlantRight matter? What sort of impacts is our program having? And then we should have time for some Q&A at the end. You can also put those questions in the chat. All right, so first of all, what is
quick
PlantRight?
correction. Sorry, Alex, quick correction. Don't put those questions in the chat. Put those questions in the Q&A.
In the Q&A, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Sort it out. Thanks, carry on.
All right, didn't mean to confuse anyone. Thanks, Doug. PlantRight is a program dedicated to promoting the use of non-invasive plants for gardening and landscaping in California. And as the poll at the beginning showed, the need for this program arose because invasive plants through the pathway of horticulture is a major problem. A group of professionals came together from conservation, the nursery industry, government, and academia because they realized that they had a common threat. Invasive plants harm the environment and cost California millions of dollars each year to monitor and to manage. So this group of professionals called the California Horticulture Invasive Prevention Group, otherwise known as the PlantRight Steering Committee, got together back in the early 2000s to prioritize slowing the spread of invasive plants that were still legally marketable in California. And I bring that up because there is a California noxious weed list that growers and retailers are not legally allowed to propagate, trade, or sell in California. However, PlantRight is focused on the hundreds of others that have not quite crossed that threshold to the definition of illegal. For various reasons, there's special exclusions in some cases. They're not on that illegal list. And yet, just because they're not illegal doesn't mean that they're not harmful. So those are the plants that PlantRight is working on. And we're not working on this issue alone. Our program is collaborative, voluntary, meaning it's not, not bound by regulations of any sort, and science-based. So we make sure we have the data to support what we're doing. And it is supported by partners and advisors across all these different sectors that you see across the board. Different folks from industry, nonprofits, government, and science. And this kind of well-rounded group of stakeholders ensures that our program is getting input from all the different sides of this issue. This very diverse group of stakeholders is really key to our process and to ensuring that there's communication across all these different sectors. So that's a quick intro or kind of background on the PlantRight program. And before I go any further, we should define what are invasive plants. Invasive plants are non-native to an area. They can spread and reproduce abundantly on their own. And ultimately, they cause ecological, economic, and/or harm to human health and safety. Now, I like to use a very notorious plant as my example here. This plant on the screen is pampas grass. And this is a picture of pampas grass, not growing in the wild, but as you can see, there's a sprinkler head in the middle there of the screen. This is at a wholesale nursery grower somewhere in the Central Valley of California. And this is where the problem often starts. Here's pampas grass a little further down the line at a retail nursery. You can imagine someone not knowing what it is. They just think it's beautiful. They go ahead and pick it up to plant it in their yard. Here's a mature pampas grass plant that's been planted in someone's front yard. It's grown and developed. As you can see, it's a very large plant, very dense standing of it. And then here it is. You can see there's kind of the houses in the neighborhood behind. Here it is, escaped into kind of a disturbed area near a neighborhood, but just outside it. And those seeds, those that come from those feathery plumes that seem to be so eye-catching for folks, that's where thousands of seeds can spread into wildlands and disturbed areas like this. And before you know it, you might have a full-blown invasion. So pampas grass here in this picture, it's taken over the entire hillside and it's crowded out native plants and other useful plants that might have been good for, shelter or forage for wildlife. And pampas grass is really a very poor replacement for any of those plants. It's not nutritious. Well, I think the only animals that like to nest in it at all are rats. So it has very little to offer wildlife when it takes over an area. And it's very difficult to remove, as well as very expensive to remove. And this is just one of the many examples that I could have shown, but I feel like this one really illustrates it very dramatically, the kind of harms that it can wreak on the environment. So this slide here is just kind of a summary of the numerous kinds of harm to the environment and the economy that invasive plants can cause. And this is just a starting point, right? I mean, there's a lot of damage that these plants can cause. And I mentioned millions of dollars earlier. The economic impacts of invasive plants in California is over $80 million per year. So it's a very expensive problem. And part of the solution that we've come to is preventing these plants from getting out in the first place. As was mentioned at the beginning, horticulture is a main pathway for the introduction of invasive plants. Some plants are maybe accidentally introduced through contaminated animal feed or packing materials, but others, like pampas grass, were planted intentionally over 100 years ago before their invasive tendencies were known. So not only does PlantRight keep an eye on plants that we know are currently invasive, but we also monitor plants that have shown early warning signs of being invasive. That way, hopefully it doesn't get to that level of invasion that we saw with the pampas grass example. Now, I want to dive deeper into what PlantRight is doing about these plants that are still for sale out there. This is a copy of our plant list, we have a printable PDF version on our website that you could access. So on the left-hand side are some of the invasive plants on our list: green fountain grass, Mexican feathergrass, pampas grass, water hyacinth, yellow water iris. Those are some of our most conspicuous, #1 most wanted plants, or least wanted rather, as we're trying to prevent them from being sold and getting out into the environment. And then on the right side, we have some more information. For every invasive plant on our plant list, we provide the non-invasive alternatives that we suggest. And these are not only California native plants. We do recommend some California natives, but we also recommend non-invasive alternatives that may, function very similarly or have some sort of look that's similar aesthetically as some of these other plants, but are much less harmful. Another important piece to notice about this plant list is that we've organized these plants by regions in California. And so these climate zones that we have are based off the sunset zones, and we've grouped them into 5 distinct zones because an invasive plant is, it's not necessarily invasive everywhere. So, and also the alternative plants, what you would want to plant in the desert would probably be very different from what you would want to plant in the mountains, for example. So we have it organized by suitable climates. And we also indicate where the invasive problems, which climates the invasive plants are problematic under each of those headings. So part of how we track this is with our spring nursery survey. Some of you may be familiar with the spring nursery survey. And then for those of you who are not, I'll go ahead and give some background. The key purposes of our spring retail nursery survey are to keep our priority plant list up to date. We also use it to track invasive plants in the retail market, and also to track our progress in stopping the sale of these invasive plants. And it really overall informs our strategy, as you'll see when I discuss the results from last year's survey. So this slide is to introduce and thank a group of very important people. So the University of California Master Gardeners have been our main volunteer base for each survey year. We really couldn't do what we do without them for the survey and have the same kind of reach without these wonderful volunteers. So, and as you can see, these folks for our survey, they have a list of plants and a clipboard, and they go out to individual nurseries to do the survey and count how many plants are there, record which of our invasive plants are present, and then they report all of that information back to us. And that's how we're able to collect our data. And they take these wonderful, wonderful photos that we use for our website and social media and for presentations like this. So I should premise this. So I'm showing the results from the 2021 survey, as unfortunately we were not able to, we did not have the funding to implement a survey this year. So the 2021 nursery survey results are our most recent. So 2021 was our 9th survey year, and we had 85 volunteers participate. They surveyed over 190 stores across 38 California counties. And on the right-hand side on that map, you can see the distribution of the various stores we surveyed. If there's a red dot, that means one or more plants from our invasive list was present at the nursery. And if there's a green dot, that means that none of the invasive plants on our list were found at those nurseries. So you can see the distribution's pretty favorable, actually, a lot more green dots than red dots. So that's definitely what we want to see. Always encouraging. Here is kind of a big picture over time of the nursery survey. So the overall percentage of stores selling invasive plants is declining, and that's the good news. So in 2016, 31% of nurseries surveyed were selling locally invasive plants. Then it dropped to 29% in 2017. And in 2021, we were at 20%. So those are all great trends showing the results we want to see. Of nurseries that were selling any locally invasive plants in 2021, only 6% had more than one species of the invasive plants on our list for sale. And that's slightly down from the previous survey year. So here's some statistics by individual species that we were looking at. In terms of the specific species being sold, 5 out of the 7 PlantRight priority species were found in the 2021 survey. Mexican feathergrass, or Stipa tenuissima, was found at 16.5% of stores surveyed, and continues to be the most commonly sold locally invasive plant. There were some exciting results, though. This was the first year that highway ice plant and yellow water iris were not found in any of the surveyed stores. We're going to continue to keep an eye on them. That's the first year that that's happened, and so we're going to keep monitoring to make sure it wasn't just kind of a fluke. It's impossible to know if those plants will stay on the market or pop back up. Usually our criteria for retiring a plant from our list or retiring the plant from the survey is for it to be at 1% or less of the stores for 3 consecutive years. So even though those results are very encouraging, we want to make sure that that trend continues to stay consistent before we would consider revising our plant list on there. So we'll be collecting more data, hopefully next year, and trying to see if those results hold true. So here is our next piece of data. Now, this graph is looking at stores by retail type, and this often surprises folks in that the big box stores are actually selling the lowest percentage of invasive plants that are on the PlantRight list. So this was the first year that no invasive plants from the PlantRight list were found at any of the big box stores that were surveyed. This continues a steep downward trend that we've been seeing since 2014, when PlantRight partnered with a major retailer to eliminate the sale of locally invasive plants from all their stores in California. In 2017, there was only 3% of box stores that were found to be selling locally invasive plants. And in 2021, that number went down to 0% from the stores we surveyed. And the way I like to think about or help people think about this is, with big box stores, there's uniformity, there's a greater amount of uniformity across all these big box stores, right? So they might have one master list of plants that their stores and their plant buyers are purchasing off of. And so for them, when they agree to take a plant out of their stores, it's as simple as unchecking a box in their inventory system. And then across the board, their stores in California won't be selling it. And that's basically the results we've seen since partnering with some of these big box stores. With small chain and independent nurseries, there's a lot more variation between what these individual independent nurseries are selling. So you can see on the graph, those numbers are a lot less consistent. And actually from survey year to survey year, we've seen jumps in the number of invasive plants actually increasing some years, and then sometimes being a little lower. So it's a lot more variable in those kind of smaller independent nurseries. Considering the success that PlantRight has had partnering with the box stores in decreasing the sale of invasive plants, one of our recommended next steps or kind of strategies that we want to focus on going into the future of this program is to focus on partnering with those smaller chain retailers in a similar way that we've partnered with some of these big box stores. And in doing that, by talking with the corporate headquarters of maybe a small chain that has 5 or 6 stores across California, that would be 5 or 6 stores that we can get these invasive plants out of. And so those are the kind of partnerships and the sort of strategies we're looking into moving forward with next. That way we can continue to see these numbers going down. So that's what we're looking forward to. We do have some retail nursery partners. That is a big part of our program. And so that's what you see here displayed on this next screen. We like to thank our partners, and we also promote them on our website by having a directory of these plants and of these stores. And the thing about our retail nursery partners, they've committed to not sell any of the invasive plants on the PlantRight priority list. And if they are selling them, when they become a partner, they're committed to phasing them out over a certain amount of time. And that has been a really great strategy to promote non-invasive plants and to really create an understanding with some of these big partners in the nursery industry about where we're at with the invasive plant issue in California. So these are some of our 25 retail nursery partners, which if you're considering the chains, it adds up to more than 460 storefronts across California. And we believe that by increasing and strengthening these partnerships, PlantRight can have an even greater impact in the future. So I know we have a lot of, it looks like we might have a lot of questions. You can find PlantRight on social media. All of the survey results from 2021 and previous years are also on our website. www.plantright.org. And then if you have some other specific questions or anything that I don't answer here in this presentation today, you can also email info@plantright.org, and that's usually the fastest way to make sure I get back to you. So with that, I'll I'll say thank you and wrap it up.
Thank you, Alex. It's very interesting, and congratulations on the continued success of the program. Yeah,
Thank you.
we will take questions next, and before we do, I want to, depending on how long this program goes with the Q&A, I want to thank you all, everybody who attended and is participating as being part of California Invasive Action Week. And Randall put a link to some of the upcoming activities in the chat. And you can access that if you're interested in learning more about invasives this week. We are recording this session today, and we'll be distributing it or making it available later in the week. And a final point before we go to questions is if you all know how to do so, we'd appreciate knowing your affiliation to any group or agency or private sector business that you're affiliated with, so we can understand who's attending and from where today. So we do have several questions, but I see that there were a few who were in it that were inadvertently placed in the chat. So
and I think I grabbed some of those. So yeah, I can go ahead and handle the questions, Julie.
Okay, do you want to do that with a okay, go ahead, Nikki.
All right, thanks. Okay, Alex, so we had a couple questions regarding funding for the surveys.
Sure.
One of them was from Chuck. He said, since you use Master Gardener volunteers, what are some of the costs associated with conducting your nursery surveys?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And that has a lot to do with the survey design and analysis. So the major costs for the survey, we employ or we contract with a statistical analyst, and she designs a survey sampling plan. So it, especially with, or even with as many volunteers as we normally have participating in this program, it's still very difficult to try and reach all the individual nurseries in the state of California. We have thousands in California. And so what we do is take a sample of nurseries from the CDFA licensed nursery list, and we try to make sure that the number of nurseries we're sampling in each county represents the number of nurseries in that county. So in order to take a representative sample of these nurseries, we employ a statistician to kind of design that and select those nurseries. And then when we get all of the data back, we generate a very thorough report on the analysis of all the data. And that is also part of the cost of hiring a statistical analyst to do that. And those reports are all available on the PlantRight website for anyone to read if you're interested. And then, of course, for staffing as well, which would be me in this case. So.
Thanks, Alex. And then, yeah, we had another question from Michael. Do nurseries care that people are walking around taking inventory notes about their nurseries?
Yeah, it's, so we're not the only organization to be doing surveys in the state of California at nurseries. We're the only one of this specific nature and intent. However, we really do, we tend to get varied responses from nurseries. Very, very few times has a volunteer ever been asked to leave or not conduct the survey. Generally, we advise our volunteers to be upfront, if anyone asks them, hey, what are you doing here? Just to explain the purpose of the survey. I should also mention that we keep all of the nurseries completely anonymous. So every nursery that's visited, it has a nursery code so that our point isn't to single out and point fingers at individual nurseries and make them feel guilty or targeted or something for carrying invasive plants. It's a purely, informational survey, not tied to any regulations. And we try to we train our volunteers to assure the nurseries of that if they are approached and asked to explain why they're taking pictures and taking notes of the plants.
All right, yeah, and then we've got a couple more questions from the chat.
Mhm.
We had a question from Claudia. She said, what measures are there in place to disallow nurseries to sell non-native, highly invasive plants? And what agency has the authority to require and enforce this?
Yeah, so that's going back to the CDFA noxious weed list. The CDFA noxious weed list is a list of plants that are legally not allowed to be propagated and sold in California. I think there's also a federal list through USDA, I believe, plants that are federally not allowed to be sold or propagated. And then within the CDFA, California Department of Food and Agriculture, thanks for reminding me, Doug. So they have a rating system of different plants where they have professionals do very thorough assessments of the plants. It's based on how widespread the impacts are and the biology of the plants, how long they've been in certain places. There's a lot of different criteria that has to be met before a plant is placed on that illegal do not sell list. And so PlantRight, our approach is to work with these nurseries to have them voluntarily phase out some of these plants. And that is part of our goal and our mission with what we do.
All right, and then Elizabeth had a question. Do you think that the COVID era plant collection craze has impacted the number of invasive plants available at retailers?
If I'm going off the survey results, no, but there's a whole sector of plants that are sold, online, and there's seed sales that are incredibly hard to track. There are some organizations, I think USDA might even have a program where they're trying to track the sale of invasive plants online, but those kinds of transactions are very difficult to track and would certainly require a different method than what we're doing, which is the in-person nursery visits. So it's really hard to say. I don't know. I don't have the data on that to really speak to it.
Yeah, it was an interesting question.
Yeah.
We got another from David. How can we get local nurseries and botanical gardens to join this program?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of nurseries and botanical gardens are very supportive of our program already. There's various botanic gardens in California that we work with. The UC Davis Arboretum, they have their Arboretum All-Star list, which are plants that are great to have in California, and we promote them. We kind of cross-promote each other. We've had folks, Jim Fulson from the Huntington down in Southern California was part of our steering committee and has given his input over time. There's also, there's some great work being done with botanic gardens from the group in the Midwest, I think, that they're trying to, botanic gardens are actually, they're really interesting because they're kind of a safe place to have these plants and kind of observe their behavior. And so a lot of the information we have on some of these plants comes from botanic gardens, because a lot of times they're growing species that are very unique or introduced from a certain area, and then we can kind of watch them, but like in that safer space.
Thanks. Yeah, your audio cut out at the end, but it seems fine now.
Oh, okay. Sorry, hopefully you didn't miss too much.
I think just a couple of words. Okay, so we have another question from Denise. What about the spread of harmful fungi, bacteria, and the like through the horticultural trade?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of times, especially if there's an invasive plant that's promoting the spread of some sort of invasive pathogen or pest, a lot of times that's considered in kind of where it ranks in like a harmful scale. So I'm pretty sure in most assessments that I know that kind of consider how invasive is this plant, there is a certain level of consideration for, is it also spreading other harmful invasive organisms? So I know that's definitely an issue with like the tree of heaven, for example, being a host for spotted lanternfly. There's probably that's the main example I can think of, but I know that there's a lot of others like that. So I do think it is considered in the overall assessment of invasive plants. That's a great question.
All right, and then we have a question from Chuck. Have any surveys been conducted of consumers purchasing plants and whether or not they take the invasiveness of plants into consideration when making selections?
Yeah, that's a good question. And not by us. And if I had to kind of make an educated guess on this, I don't think most consumers are really considering it when they're purchasing plants. A lot of landscapers aren't considering it unless they're expressly trying to do some sort of native or natural landscaping, or if they're partnering with some kind of environmental group. I don't think it's at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and that's why programs like PlantRight are so important, to try and get these plants phased out of nurseries, and also to provide alternative plants that are not invasive, that will still look beautiful in people's yards, and to encourage nurseries to sell those kind of plants instead.
All right, and then we have, another question from Brandon. Is it appropriate or effective to inform nurseries when you see them selling invasive plants?
Yeah, I mean, so it kind of, it's kind of like weighing, picking your battles, right? So, I mean, you could inform a nursery if you see them selling an invasive plant. You could inform me, you could contact PlantRight and let us know. I think this also pertains to another question I kind of saw on there, where, a lot of times these nurseries are selling plants that are popular, that they know sell well. And that's like your green fountain grass and your Mexican feathergrass. They're very popular for the landscaping industry. A lot of people like the way they look. And a lot of times, if that's a big seller for the nursery, they've got to weigh their options as far as their profit versus, especially with the small nurseries, they got to weigh like their profits with, you know, the harmfulness of selling an invasive plant. And unfortunately, that puts them in a very difficult position as far as deciding whether or not to sell that invasive plant or not. So in that case, it'd really be up to you, but you can always report it to PlantRight. And then sometimes we have kind of more of a, especially if you have like an inside contact with the nursery, we can kind of discuss it on a more back end of things and maybe reach out to them that way.
All right, thanks. And it's 12:50. We only have a few questions left. So I guess I'll keep going through them if, yeah, you have time.
Yeah. Good.
All right, and then we have a question from Amanda. Are you still working with growers and landscape designers and maintenance crews to eliminate invasive plants?
So yes and no. So we do have on our advisory committee or our steering committee, we do have folks involved from the landscaping industry and from the plant grower side of things. So we are definitely still keeping them in mind. I would say that less of our work has been focused with those industries, but we're certainly always very open to those connections and to working with those industries as part of our mission. Just historically, PlantRight has been more focused on the retail side of things. So.
And then we have a question from Claudia. What steps to take if a nursery on the PlantRight list are in stock? I'm assuming they mean they have invasives on there. Talk to the manager.
Yeah, you could. I would let us know. And that's part of why, you know, we have these established relationships with these retail nurseries, is to have that kind of line of communication that's already been opened about invasive plants. You could inform their managers, but I guess it kind of depends on the circumstances. So I would let PlantRight know first.
Sounds good. And then I think this is the last question from Carolyn. How is the accidental importation of invasives coming in along with other products?
I don't know. Honestly, that's an interesting question. I mean, I assume that, you know, it's accidental, so I assume there's probably always some of it going on. There's obviously, you know, customs and border controls and stuff in effect, partly because of that. Although I imagine, you know, there's, you know, seeds are hard to catch in a huge shipment of plants. But I know for some, you know, some of the pests of more concern or of higher concern, higher priority, you know, those are always being looked for to make sure they're not crossing in borders and stuff like that between states and well, and in fact, countries.
All right, yeah, thanks, Alex. You handled all the questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking them, everyone. I appreciate the questions, and you know, if you have more info at plantright.org, that's also where you can report invasive plants that you see maybe at your local nurseries, and we can see if we're already working with that nursery in any degree, or if there may be someone we need to start doing more outreach to and partnering with.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for helping with the questions, and thank each of you for participating today and your concern about invasives in California. That concludes our presentation today, and please check the links we posted, and perhaps we will see you later in the week. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.